My name is John, and I am a fisherman in the small coastal village of Blackwater. Here, life revolves around the sea. Wooden houses hug the shore. The smell of salt and fresh fish permeates the air, and the stories of old sailors echo in the taverns and nightly bonfires. My family is the reason I face the waters every day. My wife, Margaret, is the fortress that keeps our home standing. She is a woman of few words but of unshakable strength. Our children, Emily and Peter, are the light that brightens our days, always running along the beach with smiles on their faces and dreams in their eyes. Fishing is what sustains us, but recent times have been tough. The sea, once generous, now seems to keep its treasures deeper. The fish are scarce, and each day brings a new challenge. With winter approaching and supplies dwindling, the pressure to bring in a good haul increases. It was this need that led me to make a drastic decision. I decided to embark on a long fishing journey, venturing into deeper waters of the Pacific, where few dare to go. Margaret was worried but understood the urgency of the situation. With a tight hug and a gentle kiss, we said our goodbyes at the pier, carrying our hopes and prayers. Preparing the boat was hard work. I checked the nets, hooks, and supplies, ensuring everything was in order for the journey. My fishing companions, old friends who share the same passion and need, helped with the preparations, wishing me luck and a safe return. I set off at dawn when the sun began to tint the sky with a soft orange, promising a new day. The first miles were calm, the water serene, and the wind favorable. However, I knew the vastness of the ocean was unpredictable, and greater challenges awaited me. As I sailed, I thought of my family and the promise of a better future. The motivation to keep going came from the need to support those I love and the hope of finding a bountiful catch that would lift us out of hardship. The first days at sea were a mix of anticipation and routine. I woke before the sun rose, feeling the salty breeze and the constant sway of the boat under my feet. My routine began with a quick inspection of the equipment, followed by a silent prayer to the sea, a tradition taught by my father to ensure a safe and fruitful catch. After a simple and sparse breakfast, I cast the nets into the sea, hoping the depths would grace me with a good haul. The sound of seagulls was my only constant companion, while the horizon stretched infinitely ahead, a promise and a challenge. However, from the start, I faced difficulties. The boat's engine, usually reliable, began to malfunction unexpectedly. Sometimes it simply refused to start, forcing me to lose precious hours trying to fix it. Radio communication was also intermittent, with static and interruptions making it impossible to contact the village and reassure Margaret about my progress. The fish, meanwhile, were mysteriously scarce. I cast the nets repeatedly, but they returned almost empty. The few fish I managed to catch were smaller than usual and often had strange marks, as if they had been scratched or bitten by something large and invisible. The nights were especially challenging. Without the coastal lights to guide my way, I relied solely on the stars and instinct to stay on course. The cold wind cut through my skin, and the silence was unsettling, broken only by the sound of the waves and occasionally by inexplicable noises that seemed to come from the depths of the sea. On the third night, while sitting on the deck trying to fix one of the winches, I heard a sharp, prolonged sound, something I had never heard before. It sounded like a wail, a distant call from the heart of the ocean. I stayed alert, my eyes fixed on the darkness, but I couldn't identify the source of the sound. This experience left me uneasy, but I decided to ignore it, attributing it to my tired imagination. As the days passed, the anomalies continued. The compass, which had always been a reliable instrument, began to spin uncontrollably at certain moments, as if an invisible force were interfering. At other times, I felt a strange presence around me, a feeling of being watched that sent chills down my spine. Despite the difficulties and premonitions, I continued my journey. I needed to bring sustenance to my family and prove to myself that I could face any adversity. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to question whether I was prepared for the secrets and challenges that the vast Pacific held. The motivation that drove me was the same that began to weigh on my heart. I missed Margaret and the children, and the loneliness of the sea seemed to intensify every thought and concern. But I couldn't return empty-handed. With each new dawn, I renewed my determination, aware that I needed to keep going, not just for myself, but for all who depended on me in Blackwater. And so, with the sea around me and the unknown ahead, I moved forward one day at a time, facing the difficulties and anomalies that arose, still unaware that the worst challenges were yet to come. The horizon, once calm and stable, began to change as heavy dark clouds gathered in the sky. The wind, which blew gently and steadily, now howled, whipping the deck with relentless gusts. The temperature dropped abruptly, and a sense of impending doom took hold of me. I knew I was about to face a storm. The first raindrop fell heavily, followed by a deluge that turned the sea into a gray, murky landscape. The waves began to grow, rising like liquid walls, threatening to swallow my small boat. I ran to ensure all hatches were closed and the nets properly secured. Every second counted, and every decision was crucial to my survival. The boat rocked violently, tossed from side to side by the waves. The wind's force was so intense that I could barely stand. The sails, even when furled, flapped frantically, and the masts groaned under the pressure. The storm's noise was deafening. Thunder rumbled loudly in the sky, accompanied by the piercing sound of lightning slicing through the darkness. As I struggled to keep control of the helm, a monstrous wave hit the boat, throwing me to the ground. I quickly got up, tasting the salty blood in my mouth, but there was no time to check my injuries. The sea was furious, and the battle for survival had just begun. The engine, already problematic, choked and stopped working. I tried desperately to restart it, but it was useless. I was at the mercy of the waves, a toy in the hands of nature. The boat began to tilt dangerously, and I heard the unmistakable sound of wood cracking, or the hull was beginning to give way. The torrential rain turned the deck into a slippery, treacherous field. Every step was a struggle not to be thrown into the sea. Clinging to the helm with all my strength, I felt the rough would cut into my hands. But the pain was just an insignificant detail in the face of the storm's magnitude. Lightning lit up the sky, briefly revealing the ocean's fury around me. In one of these flashes, I saw something that froze my blood. A colossal shadow moving in the depths. Something that seemed to be more than just an illusion caused by fear and darkness. I looked away, focusing on keeping the boat afloat. The hours dragged on like an eternity. Finally, the storm began to lose strength, and the waves gradually subsided. I was exhausted, my body aching, and my nerves frayed. The feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. For a moment, I believed I wouldn't survive. When the storm finally passed, and calm began to return, I took a moment to assess the damage. The boat was severely compromised. The main mast cracked, several deck boards ripped off, and the engine damaged, not to mention the soaked supplies and torn nets. The solitude and isolation intensified after the storm. I was in the middle of the vast Pacific with a damaged boat and limited resources. Despair began to creep in, but I fought against it, focusing on finding a solution. I needed to make temporary repairs, improvise, and find a way to return to my family. With the sun timidly rising between the scattered clouds, I started working on the repairs. Each hammer blow, each nail was a step towards survival, an attempt to keep hope alive. But the feeling that something dark was lurking in the depths never left me. an invisible presence that seemed to observe my every move. After the storm, the calm seemed almost surreal. The sea was calmer than ever, as if it were recovering from the fury it had shown. I took advantage of this truce to inspect the boat more carefully. With each improvised repair, the hope of returning home grew, albeit slightly. While rummaging through the hold compartments for tools and materials for the repairs, I found something unexpected. A wooden panel seemed loose, slightly different from the surrounding planks. With a bit of force, I managed to remove it, revealing a small hidden space. Inside was an object wrapped in an old, moldy tarp. Unwrapping the tarp, I discovered a worn leather diary with a cracked cover and yellowed pages. I sat on the deck, curiosity taking over. I opened the diary carefully, and on the first page, almost illegible from moisture and the passage of years, was the name Ethan. That name was not unfamiliar to me. I vaguely remembered stories about a fisherman from our village who had mysteriously disappeared many years ago. Ethan had been one of the best, known for his courage and skill, but also for his scary stories about the sea. As I flipped through the pages, Ethan's accounts began to emerge, each more disturbing than the last. The first account spoke of his fishing routines and the common difficulties we all faced: storms, torn nets, failing engines. But as I progressed in the reading, things began to take a darker tone. Ethan described strange and inexplicable encounters. He talked about sea creatures that resembled nothing he or any other fisherman had seen. One particular entry caught my attention. "Today, I saw something in the depths. It wasn't a fish nor a whale. It was something bigger, older. Its eyes, if I can call them that, watched me with a cold intelligence. Since then, I can't shake the feeling of being watched." As I read, I began to feel a disturbing connection with Ethan's accounts. It was as if his experiences were somehow linked to the anomalies I had also started facing. He mentioned the compass spinning out of control, equipment failing inexplicably, and scarce fish, many with strange marks on their bodies. Ethan also wrote about whispers during the night, voices calling his name, coming from the sea. "They whisper to me," he wrote. "At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe my mind playing tricks. But the whispers became clearer, more insistent. They know my name, and now they start to invade my dreams." The accounts were disturbing, and a growing fear began to take hold of me. I looked around, feeling again that sense of being watched. The sky was clear, the sun shining over the calm waters, but I couldn't shake the impression that something was wrong, that something was waiting in the depths. As night fell, I put the diary away, but Ethan's words continued to echo in my mind. I felt a mix of fascination and terror. Ethan's story was not just a warning but a premonition, a shadow that now loomed over my own journey. In the darkness of my small boat, with only the faint light of a lantern, I began to understand that the sea held secrets far beyond human comprehension. And as the waves gently rocked the boat, I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the whispers that seemed to start forming in the night wind, calling my name, just as they had called Ethan's. What began as a quest for sustenance for my family had now transformed into something much more sinister. I needed to learn more about Ethan and his accounts, understand what he had faced, and perhaps find a way to survive whatever awaited in the depths. After finding Ethan's diary, a sense of unease began to accompany me at every moment. His words echoed in my mind, leaving an indelible mark. The sea, once my ally and source of sustenance, now seemed a vast and unknown enemy, hiding secrets in its depths. In the following nights, as I read more of Ethan's disturbing accounts, I began to notice subtle changes around me. The wind that blew across the deck carried indistinct murmurs, almost as if whispering my name. Initially, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, influenced by the dark stories I was reading. However, the events began to intensify. One night, while on the deck, I observed the waters around the boat. The full moon illuminated the sea's surface, creating a silver glow. It was then that I saw it. A huge shadow slid under the water, too fast to identify its shape, but large enough to send a chill down my spine. I stood there, paralyzed, trying to convince myself that it was just an illusion, a trick of the light and waves. But the shadows continued to appear. During the day, I saw dark shapes moving in the depths, following my boat in an unsettling manner. At night, things worsened. The whispers became clearer, more insistent. They called my name, a mix of voices that seemed to come from all sides. Ethan had described something similar, and the realization that I was living the same experience increased my despair. One early morning, I woke up to the sound of something scratching the boat's hull. I ran to the deck, expecting to find some net or piece of wood stuck, but there was nothing, just the persistent sound, like claws scraping against the wood, coming from below me. My eyes scanned the darkness, but I couldn't see anything beyond the vastness of the ocean. That same night, I experienced my first full hallucination. While trying to fall back asleep, I felt something cold and wet touch my foot. I looked down and, for a moment, saw black, slimy tentacles climbing the deck, grabbing my legs. I screamed and jumped back, but when I blinked, they had disappeared. However, the cold sensation remained, and fear took hold of me. The days became a constant struggle against paranoia. Every sound, every movement in the waters made my heart race. Reading the diary became an obsession, hoping to find answers or a way to escape Ethan's fate. His final accounts were fragmented, desperate, full of fear and hopelessness. He described creatures that came at night, whispers that invaded his mind, visions of an underwater world where ancient monsters awaited. I began to doubt my own sanity. Isolation and sleep deprivation only worsened things. One afternoon, while fixing a net, I clearly heard my daughter Emily call me. I looked up, expecting to see her running on the deck, but quickly remembered that I was alone, miles away from any coast. The hallucinations were getting stronger, more personal. As the days passed, the line between reality and illusion became increasingly blurred. I began to question everything I saw and heard. The shadows in the waters, the whispers in the wind, the ghostly touches, everything seemed to conspire to drive me mad. Ethan's diary now seemed a grim warning of what was to come, and the feeling of vulnerability and despair grew with each passing day. As I looked at the horizon, feeling the weight of the unknown and the imminent terror, I knew I needed to find a way to resist, to face the horrors the sea concealed. Each page of the diary, each new day of torment, mingled my determination with fear. The sea held terrible secrets, and I was about to discover just how deep and treacherous those depths went. Ethan's words continued to echo in my mind, and as the days passed, I delved deeper into the disturbing accounts he had left behind. His diary was a grim testament to his journey and the unimaginable things he had encountered at sea. As I read each page, the events he described seemed to intertwine with my own reality, making it difficult to distinguish between what was real and what was the product of my increasingly unhinged imagination. Ethan's words haunted me as I watched the waters around my boat. With each shadow I saw beneath the surface, I felt the same cold, ancient gaze upon me. The sea, once familiar, now seemed a living entity, full of secrets and hidden intentions. May 15th, 1934. The nights are the worst. The whispers have started to become clearer. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe my mind playing tricks. But the whispers became clearer, more insistent. They know my name, and now they are starting to invade my dreams. The nights at sea were endless. Lying in my bunk, I heard the whispers Ethan had described. They seemed to come from all sides, calling my name with voices made of wind and water. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to shut out the voices, but they penetrated my mind, filling me with a primal and irrational fear. May 20th, 1934. Tonight, I saw a creature emerge from the waters. It was huge, covered in black, glistening scales. Its eyes were like lanterns, shining with a spectral light. It watched me for a few moments before disappearing back into the depths. Since then, I feel something following me, a constant presence in the shadows. Reading this passage, I remembered the shadow I had seen days before, gliding beneath the water. Ethan's description brought forth a visceral fear. The creatures he had seen seemed so real, so palpable, that I could almost feel their presence around me. Every sound from the boats every ripple in the water, made my heart race. May 25th, 1934. I feel like I'm not alone anymore. Something is with me on the boat, something that shouldn't exist. I feel its gaze on me. I feel its cold breath on my neck. I try not to look at the shadows, but they seem to grow, to come closer. I need to find out what's happening before it's too late. It was impossible to ignore the growing sense of paranoia. As the hours dragged on, the presence Ethan described seemed to become more real. I felt something on the boat with me, a shadow watching from the dark corners, a cold that couldn't be explained by the wind or the dampness. May 30th, 1934. Today, I found strange marks on the hull. They look like claws or teeth, something trying to get in. Each night, the whispers get louder, more desperate. They want something from me. I'm starting to understand what must be done, but I'm afraid it's too late to save my soul. The marks Ethan mentioned now appeared on my boat as well. Deep, inexplicable scratches on the hull, as if something were trying to breach the barrier between the sea and the deck. Each new mark was a reminder that I was not safe, that something ancient and malevolent was around me. As I read Ethan's accounts, a dark truth began to unfold. The sea was more than just a body of water. It was an abyss full of ancient horrors, creatures that inhabited the dreams and nightmares of sailors. And now, those horrors were lurking, waiting for the right moment to emerge and claim their prey. Each day became a struggle for sanity. I needed to understand what Ethan had discovered, find out how he had faced the sea's horrors. The diary's pages were my only hope, a dark guide to survive whatever awaited me in the depths. With each new reading, the line between reality and madness became thinner, and Ethan's despair began to mirror my own heart. Ethan's words were a constant weight on my mind, and with each page I read, the feeling of being dragged into the same abyss of madness he described grew more intense. The hallucinations, which started as shadows and whispers, soon became much more vivid and terrifying. It all started with small things, objects that moved when I wasn't looking, tools that disappeared and reappeared in different compartments. At first, I thought it was just fatigue or my own distraction, but it soon became clear that something much more sinister was at play. One night, while struggling against sleep, I heard heavy footsteps on the deck. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and climbed the stairs 3 at a time, expecting to find an intruder. But the deck was empty, with only the stars and the moon witnessing my solitude. However, the sound persisted, as if someone were walking around me, hidden in the shadows. June 1st, 1934. The sounds are getting louder. I hear laughter, whispers, footsteps. I feel a cold touch on my skin, like invisible fingers pulling me. I'm losing my grip on what's real and what's illusion. I need to resist, but I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The following nights were even worse. I started seeing figures in the corner of my eyes, shadows that moved quickly when I tried to focus on them. The worst was when these figures began to take more defined shapes, pale and distorted faces, lifeless eyes watching me with insatiable hunger. The whispers, once distant and indistinct, were now clear and personal. I heard my wife, Margaret, calling my name, her voice full of anguish. I heard my children crying, their voices echoing through the boat, begging for me to save them. Each time I responded, I found no one, only the ocean's emptiness around me. During the day, the sunlight offered a brief sense of relief, but the hallucinations continued to torment me. The fish I caught had distorted shapes. Their eyes seemed fixed on me with a pleading expression. The shadows in the waters became more frequent, and I began to see huge, scaly tentacles that quickly hid when I tried to shine a light on them. June 10th, 1934. They're with me now all the time. The shadows won't leave me alone. The whispers invade my thoughts. I'm starting to doubt my own sanity. Am I really seeing these things? Or is my mind betraying me? I need to find a way to end this before it's too late. Gradually, I began to avoid sleep, fearing the nightmares that would surely come. But sleep deprivation only worsened things. My perception of reality began to distort. I couldn't distinguish between what was real and what was the product of my haunted mind. The nights became a blur of horrific visions and terrifying sounds. One early morning, while on the deck, I felt something touch my shoulder. I turned quickly and saw Ethan. His face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and madness. He tried to speak, but only incomprehensible sounds came out of his mouth. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared, leaving me gasping and trembling. The constant presence of something evil became unbearable. The cold touch on my skin, the voices that wouldn't stop, the visions of impossible creatures. I was on the brink of collapse, fighting to keep my sanity while the sea, once my ally, turned into a relentless enemy. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The line between reality and illusion has vanished. Ethan tried to warn me, but now I'm trapped in the same nightmare. The sea is alive, full of horrors that defy comprehension. I need to find a way out before I lose my soul as Ethan lost his. With growing desperation inside me, the struggle to distinguish reality from illusion became a constant battle. I knew I needed to find a way to survive, to resist the call of the depths. But each passing day, each new hallucination, pulled me deeper into the madness Ethan had described. And deep in my heart, I feared it was already too late to escape the sea's horrors. The need for communication became an obsession. The radio, my only link to the outside world, seemed to mock me with its incessant static. Each day, my attempt to contact the shore or other boats became more desperate. Right after the storm, I began to frequently turn on the radio. Every time I adjusted the frequencies, I could only catch static or fragments of voices that faded before I could understand. "This is John from Blackwater. I need help. Can anyone hear me?" The response was always oppressive silence, increasing my sense of isolation. Days passed and my frustration grew. I clutched the microphone tightly, repeatedly calling for help. Each failed attempt left me more disheartened, and the silence that followed felt like a blow each time. It was as if the sea were deliberately keeping me from help, blocking any attempt at contact. With each new attempt, I began to hear strange things on the radio. Instead of the usual static, there were whispers that resembled those already haunting my nights. They were familiar voices, distorted and unintelligible, mixed with the sound of the sea. I tried to ignore them, but they became more insistent, as if trying to tell me something. One night, After a series of failed contact attempts, I finally picked up a clear signal. A male voice responded, "This is the rescue boat Blue Ocean," identifying ship and situation. I felt a wave of hope and relief. "I'm John, a fisherman from Blackwater. My boat was damaged by a storm. I'm lost in the middle of the Pacific. I need help." There was a pause, followed by an unsettling silence. Then the voice replied, "John, we need your exact location. Can you provide coordinates?" I looked at my instruments, but the compass spun uncontrollably, and the GPS seemed to have gone mad. "I can't provide precise coordinates. My instruments are failing. I'm lost, completely lost." The response was a loud, shrill hiss, followed by the return of static. Desperate, I kept calling for the rescue boat, but got no response. The sense of isolation intensified. I was surrounded by a vast and indifferent ocean, with no way to call for help or inform my situation. Each failed attempt at communication increased my despair. The loneliness weighed on me, and the lack of answers made me question my sanity. It was as if the sea had decided I shouldn't leave, trapped in an endless nightmare where my pleas for help were swallowed by the vastness of the Pacific. The days passed in a haze of despair and fear. Each failed attempt at communication and each disturbing hallucination brought me closer to the edge. The only thing anchoring me was Ethan's diary. Its pages, filled with dark accounts, were a sort of guide to the horrors I was facing. One night, I decided to delve deeper into Ethan's writings. Flipping through the pages, I found an entry that seemed different from the others. The handwriting was more hurried, almost frantic, as if he had written with desperate urgency. I found the truth about these cursed waters. It's not just us fishermen who disappear. There's something more, something old and hungry that dwells in these depths. They are the guardians of the abyss, creatures that don't belong to this world. I saw one today. It was a mass of tentacles and eyes, a being of nightmares. I'm sure it's responsible for the whispers, the shadows, everything. I need to flee, but I feel it's already too late. Ethan's words shed new light on the events. The guardians of the abyss, ancient and hungry creatures that inhabited the Pacific's depths. The understanding brought a new wave of terror. If Ethan was right, then I wasn't just facing my own mind, but something much more sinister and real. That night, I decided to stay alert, watching the sea for any sign of these creatures. The rain eventually subsided, leaving an unsettling calm in its wake. I was sitting on the deck, trying to decipher the darkness around me, when I felt a presence. I looked at the water and saw something slowly emerge. At first, it looked like just a shadow, but as it approached, horrible details were revealed. A shapeless mass of tentacles undulated on the surface, eyes glowing and inhuman scattered across its body. They fixed on me with cold and malevolent intelligence. Paralyzed by fear, I watched as the creature rose from the sea, its tentacles sliding across the deck, leaving a trail of slime and seawater. The smell it emitted was putrid, a mix of salt and decay. I tried to move, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. The whispers began again, louder and clearer than ever. They came from the creature, invading my mind, forcing their way into my thoughts. "John, John." The voice was a chorus of despair and malice, echoing in the deepest recesses of my being. The creature advanced, and I felt its cold, slimy tentacles touch my skin. The cold was penetrating, more intense than anything I had ever felt. I struggled to break free, to escape its touch, but the creature was relentless. The eyes, full of ancient hunger, seemed to devour my soul. In a final act of desperation, I managed to grab a loose piece of wood and struck the creature. It let out a high-pitched scream, a sound that reverberated through the air and water before slowly retreating into the depths. The contact was broken, and I collapsed on the deck, gasping and trembling. As calm returned, I realized the terrifying truth. Ethan was right. There was something in the depths of the Pacific, something ancient and hungry that watched us. And now, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my sanity but for my life. The struggle to maintain my sanity became a constant battle, a daily confrontation against the hallucinations that intensified every moment. The visions, the whispers, and the feeling of being watched turned the sea into a maze of terror, and there was still that creature. Each day that passed, I felt myself sinking deeper into madness. The hallucinations became more vivid and frightening. Each night, I woke up with the sensation of tentacles wrapping around me, pulling me to the bottom of the sea. My screams echoed through the empty boat, and each time I freed myself from the visions, it became harder to distinguish what was real and what was a product of my disturbed mind. One morning, while checking the supplies, I noticed that many were soaked and rotting. The claw marks on the hull seemed deeper, as if something were trying to get in. I looked around the boat, desperate, and began to question my sanity. Was I really seeing these things, or was my mind playing tricks? I decided I needed to find a solution, a way to escape this nightmare. I began to spend more time trying to fix the radio, even though I knew the chances of success were slim. With each adjustment, the static remained, and my frustration grew. "This is John from Blackwater," I repeated desperately. "I need help. Can anyone hear me?" One afternoon, while trying again, I heard a voice on the radio. It was faint and distorted but sounded human. "John, you need to get out of there. They're coming. There's no time." My heart raced. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" But the static returned, and the voice disappeared, leaving me more confused and terrified. The lack of sleep and constant state of alert began to take their toll. The shadows grew denser, more threatening. The whispers invaded my thoughts even during the day. It felt like my mind was disintegrating, fragmenting under the weight of the incessant terror. One night, I decided to confront my fears directly. I went down to the boat's hold, where the darkness was absolute. I took with me a lantern and Ethan's diary, determined to find any clue that could help me escape. The diary's pages were damp and faded, but I managed to read some final entries. "They're here. I feel their presence every moment. I'm no longer the same. The sea has changed something inside me. If anyone reads this, know that it's not the sea you should fear, but the things that live in its depths." Ethan's words echoed in my mind as I advanced through the hold. The lantern flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the lantern went out, plunging me into total darkness. I felt panic rise up my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "John!" The whisper was clear, direct, as if the darkness itself were speaking to me. "John, come to us." With a desperate effort, I managed to relight the lantern. The faint light revealed a figure in the gloom. It was Ethan, or at least what was left of him. His body was deformed, covered in scales and tentacles, his eyes glowing with an inhuman light. "Ethan?" My voice was a whisper, full of disbelief and horror. He advanced slowly, each step a reminder of the transformation he had undergone. "They got me, John, and now they're after you." Terror gave me unexpected strength. I brandished the piece of wood, ready to face whatever Ethan had become. But before I could react, he lunged at me, his tentacles wrapping around my body, squeezing me with inhuman strength. I fought with all my might, trying to break free. Ethan's diary fell to the ground, its pages scattering in the dirty water. "You need to resist, John," he murmured, his voice now a mix of humanity and monstrosity. Or you'll become one of us. With a final effort, I managed to strike Ethan with the wood. He let out a high-pitched scream, a sound that reverberated through the air and water, before slowly retreating into the shadows. The contact was broken, and I collapsed on the deck, gasping and trembling. As calm returned, I realized the terrifying truth. Ethan was right. There was something in the depths of the Pacific, something ancient and hungry that watched us. The sea was churning, reflecting the chaos within me. The shadows in the waters seemed closer, more threatening. I knew the battle wasn't over. I grabbed the radio in a last desperate attempt to contact someone. Can anyone hear me? This is John from Blackwater. I need help. The static was deafening, but then a voice responded. John, we need your exact location. Can you provide coordinates? I looked at the instruments, which were still failing, but a fragile hope blossomed within me. I'm lost in the middle of the Pacific, but I'm fighting. I need help. The voice on the radio became indistinct, as if being pulled back into the static. Hold on, John. We're coming. I felt as if the sea creatures were approaching, the whispers growing in intensity. With the lantern in one hand and the wood in the other, I prepared for whatever came next. The moonlight illuminated the deck, and the shadows of the creatures emerged from the depths. I felt a strange calm, an acceptance of what was to come. If I were to succumb, it would be fighting, facing the horrors Ethan had described. The battle that followed was a blur of tentacles, screams, and blood. Each move was a fight for survival, each strike a desperate attempt to maintain my sanity. I felt the creature's strength, their malevolence, but also my own determination. When the dawn light finally broke the horizon, the sea was calm again. The boat, though damaged, still floated. I was exhausted, bruised, but alive. The creatures had disappeared, retreating into the depths from where they came. I looked at the radio, hoping for a response, a confirmation that I had made it. But the silence persisted, leaving my fate uncertain. I knew the fight for sanity and survival wasn't over yet. And so, as the sun slowly rose in the sky, I stood on the deck, looking at the horizon, waiting and fearing what would come next. With the sun bathing the sea in a golden glow, a small vessel appeared on the horizon, signaling hope or a new horror. My tired eyes fixed on it, my heart divided between relief and terror. And as I waited, I understood that the sea would never be the same for me again. Subscribe to the channel and be sure to watch the next story playing on the screen.